Is that our cue?
Yep, we are ready to go. It's recording.
Okay, I will call this Planning Commission meeting to order on Tuesday, January 4th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. I will read my COVID protocol here. This meeting will continue to be conducted pursuant to the provisions of Government Code Section 54953, which authorizes the town to conduct essential business via teleconference. During the meeting, members of the public, members of the public may participate by providing public comment during the meeting by joining the Zoom webinar. Live verbal public comments may be made by members of the public joining the meeting via Zoom. Use the raise hand feature. And before the meeting, members of the public may also provide public comment by sending comments to the planning department. Comments received before 4 p.m. on the day of the meeting will be provided in their entirety to the commission prior to the meeting and will be part of the record, but will not be read verbally at the meeting. For more information, go on to the town's website. We will take roll call now. Vice Chair Hillis. Here. Commissioner Helber.
Present.
Commissioner Luter.
Present.
Commissioner Teal.
Here.
Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Bodie.
Here.
And I, Chair Lester, am here. We are also joined by Town of Moraga Planning Director Hamid, Associate Planner, I think Mio is here as well. And we have a planning consultant, Barry Miller, as well. Am I missing anybody who's here with us? We have Karen Murphy, our town attorney.
We also have Ellen Poling, who is the consultant for the vehicle miles traveled tonight.
Great, okay. Do any commissioners have a conflict of interest to report?
No.
No, seeing none, I have none. And contact with the applicants, I guess that would be the town in this case, so nothing to report there. Let's go ahead and do the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's have, anyone want to lead? Yay. Commissioner Luter, would you like to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We didn't get our flag up that time, but we're thinking of it. Okay, we're going to move on to public comments. This time is reserved for those in the audience who wish to address the Planning Commission. The audience should be aware that the commission may not discuss details or vote on non-agenda items. Your concerns may be referred to staff or placed on a future agenda. Public input will also be taken during each item, so you could reserve your comments for an item that is currently on the agenda if you'd like. If there are any public comments at this time, please utilize the raise hand feature and give us your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes. Don't see any attendees. We're all alone here.
So do we have any attendees in the audience?
Along our panelist, no, and then in the audience, I don't see any.
No, there's no one waiting in attendees.
We waiting.
All right, thank you. That seems worth knowing.
Interesting sound. Okay, we will move on to adoption of the consent agenda, which will include the meeting notes from our meetings from November 2nd and December 7th. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, Commissioner Bodie, do I have a second?
I can second.
Okay, Commissioner Teal. I'm gonna go roll call. Is that my back sound?
No,
Here.
the chair, I think it's Commissioner Hillis.
Oh, he's trying to speak and it's not working.
Let me sign out and I'll sign right back in.
Okay.
Yes,
Little
sure,
chipmunky.
go
Yeah,
ahead, sign out and sign back in.
Little Alvin and the Chipmunks happening.
It's a good thing I grew up with Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
That's what breathing helium will do for you.
Yeah. in.
Is this any better or do I still?
That's perfect.
That's much better, Carrie.
I think I need a new camera. This has been happening and there's no setting that I'm turning on. I just sound like a chipmunk. Sorry to interrupt you.
No problem. We are taking the roll call vote for the adoption of the consent agenda, and Vice Chair Hillis.
Aye.
Aye. Commissioner Helber,
Aye.
Commissioner Luter,
Aye.
Commissioner Teal.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Bodie,
Aye.
and Chair Luster, aye. The motion passes unanimously. And we will move on to adoption of the meeting agenda. Do we have a motion?
I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Commissioner Helber moves. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Vice Chair Hillis. And a roll call vote. Vice Chair Hillis,
Aye.
Commissioner Helber,
Aye.
Commissioner Luter,
Aye.
Commissioner Teal.
Aye.
Commissioner Davis,
Aye.
Commissioner Bodie,
Aye.
and Chair Luster, aye. The motion passes unanimously. We will move on to the public hearing. And our first item is an informational report on new vehicle miles traveled standards for evaluating transportation impacts. And I believe we will have a staff presentation. Director,
you.
you want to begin with anything before we begin our presentation, or?
Yes, I'll just make a few opening comments. Tonight we have Barry Miller Consultants, who is the lead on the advanced planning initiatives, which is the housing element, general plan update, Bollinger Canyon special study area, and all the other areas that we are looking at, including CEQA, safety element, a lot of things. And tonight we have a more focused presentation, which is by Ellen Poling, and it is on vehicle miles traveled. Vehicle miles traveled is effective under Senate Bill 743 as of July 1st, 2020. So we already have to implement it. So we are trying to do it as part of the overall housing element, and it will also require a general plan update. The purpose of vehicle miles traveled is to streamline projects near transportation, infill housing, centrally located offices, local serving retail, transit projects, bike projects, pedestrian enhancements, and safety improvements. The way I like to think about it is where we like to encourage mixed use in central areas like downtowns or along major roadways with mixed use projects through planning. Vehicle miles does the same, but it does it through a transportation lens. The Contra Costa Transportation Authority has been working on vehicle miles guidance and the methodology for all jurisdictions in Contra Costa County. And the CCTA is the responsible agency for transportation planning. So we've gotten guidance from them, and of course, the overall framework is set by the state. So I will let Ellen Poling and Barry Miller make the presentation, and then request some general guidance from you tonight. And then we will go back and we will make some adjustments based on your guidance, and then come back to you at a formal public hearing for a recommendation. Thank you.
I'm just going to turn it over to Ellen, who will be doing the presentation tonight. You all have met me, Barry Miller, with Barry Miller Consulting, and I'll be here for the Q&A portion following Ellen's presentation. Thanks.
Great. Well, good evening, commissioners, and thanks for that intro, Afshan. I will share my screen in just a moment, but I'm Ellen Poling. I'm on the Advanced Planning Initiative team. Fair and Pierce is my company, and we do the transportation planning for this project. We're concurrently, just for background, working with Lafayette and Orinda on similar efforts. Many communities are going through their housing element updates and concurrent general plan updates. And it's occurring at this very interesting time of a new paradigm for CEQA evaluation of transportation impacts, which Ashan alluded to and we'll go through tonight. I'll share my screen. I have a presentation of about 20 slides. Yeah, let me just share it. I'm hoping this will take perhaps 20 to 25 minutes, depending on whether we kind of do Q&A as we go along or you want to hold it to the end. Either way is fine. But what I want to do is, I'm gonna, let's see how I get to the next slide. Give a very brief overview of what led us to this point where we're no longer looking at transportation impacts in terms of level of service or traffic capacity or the impact on drivers, but rather the impact on the environment from drivers, which is vehicle miles of travel. It's kind of the cumulative effect of driving. If you're into calculus, it's kind of like the area under the curve or the integral, the cumulative effect of driving as opposed to just the capacity impact at an intersection.
So Ellen,
sorry,
excuse me.
Sorry to name check calculus.
Yep, we can see your notes. Did you want to just run the slideshow?
Yeah, I'll do that. I can't see you when I do that. That's why I have trouble with it.
Oh,
Is that better?
sure.
Yeah. Okay. So a brief overview of what SB 743, which was signed in 2013, actually, what the intent of that was. We'll go through a few kind of more esoteric slides about what CEQA actually requires and what the Office of Planning and Research, which implements CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, the technical advisory that they developed to give guidance to communities on how to implement this new way of looking at transportation impacts. And then finally, we'll conclude with a couple of succinct slides that summarize what CCTA has done for the communities in its jurisdiction, the Contra Costa, all the jurisdictions in Contra Costa, which is, with Fair and Pierce help, went through, as many communities and agencies have done already, you know, kind of a methodical approach of looking at what SB 743 says, looking at what the OPR technical advisory says, looking at other sources of guidance, and developed kind of a guidance document for their recommended approach for Moraga's consideration, not mandatory, but hopefully helpful to Moraga in how to implement this new set of requirements for transportation impact analysis. So the bulk of my presentation will get into some kind of wonky aspects of VMT and the choices that communities can make in terms of how they do this analysis. But then we'll conclude with a few slides on kind of what CCTA has kind of provided for their member jurisdictions, including the town of Moraga, on a way forward and a recommended way to do this analysis. And as I said, it's not mandatory for any jurisdiction to adopt, but it's actually pretty consistent with the way most communities have proceeded so far. And this is still very new. It was just became this new way of looking at CEQA impacts just became mandatory in July of 2020, or even earlier by some folks' measures. So, you know, we're still working it out. We've been doing the traditional way of traffic impact analysis for decades, and this is new. And then finally, we'll have time for Q&A at the end. And certainly, if you want to jump in during the presentation, feel free to. So this is not an exhaustive overview of how we got to this point, but you know, there are a few key legislative guideposts that got us to the SB 743 adoption in 2013. AB 32 in I think 2006 was the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act, looking at setting metrics for setting goals for reducing greenhouse gases. I think by 2020, the goal was to be at 1990 levels or below. SB 97 and many other kind of measures along the way. SB 97 came in and said, okay, well, we need to start looking at the transportation contribution to greenhouse gas within the CEQA context. SB 375 was huge. It directed MPOs like MTC and others to develop sustainable community strategies as part of their RTP development that would demonstrate how they could meet their own targeted greenhouse gas reduction goals. And so that's the law of the land now. And as MPOs do their regional transportation plan updates, they also have to do these, they have to incorporate what they call sustainable community strategies to look at transportation and land use in combination, and how the whole is going to work to reduce greenhouse gases through vehicle miles of travel, the transportation sector per se, and other aspects of land development. Finally, again, in 2013, SB 743 kind of essentially said we need to bite the bullet and stop evaluating transportation impacts of land development in terms of capacity and impact on drivers, but rather through some metric that would capture transportation's contribution to greenhouse gas. And while it didn't explicitly say in the legislation VMT, the subsequent rulemaking and technical analysis that led to the OPR's guidance landed on vehicle miles of travel. And it's the appropriate metric really, because it's the cumulative effect of driving both the trip and the length of the trip on the roadway. In a nutshell, the legislative intent, which is really important to keep in mind because that's what should guide every jurisdiction, every lead agency's interpretation of, well, how do we do this analysis? Let's keep in mind what the intent of this law was. And essentially can be boiled down to three key goals. Obviously, reduce greenhouse gases, encourage infill development, and this can be a loaded term, infill development in any context, including Moragas, and promote multimodal transportation networks. So less emphasis on widening roads, widening freeways, more emphasis on definitely keeping the network running and functional and efficient, including spot capacity improvements where needed perhaps, but also thinking about transit and how we fund transit, how much transit service we provide, thinking about better bikeways and making sure people can walk where they can walk or where they could walk between uses. So really kind of shifting the lens in terms of how we plan our transportation network. This slide is a lot, and it's really just, we include this in a lot of our kind of educational presentations, remembering that the CEQA guidelines, separate from SB 743, separate from these new changes, look for these goals: fullest possible protection of the environment, adequacy and completeness of the analysis, do an adequate investigation of the impacts, use your best efforts to find out and disclose what the impacts are, and provide a sufficient analysis. And at the end, CEQA does not require perfection. It requires due diligence and best efforts. And it's just important to keep in mind because it turns out that as with many analyses under CEQA, it can get pretty complex pretty quickly, and there are a lot of choices to make on any given project and with any given type of analysis. And it's no different with VMT, as we've discovered in the last few years as we've been working as a transportation impact consultant community to figure out the best ways and options to do VMT analysis. So Moraga is a lead agency for the general plan update, the housing element update, and projects that will come before you in the future. Some of the key decisions generally lead agencies need to make with any CEQA analysis topic are kind of filtered through this, for VMT, filtered through these bullets here. What is the methodology we'll use? Will we use a travel demand model or some off-model approach, which is also allowed? Sorry, is there a question? Okay. What metric will we use? Well, VMT, right? Done. It's not as simple as that. There are ways that you can calculate total VMT, all vehicle miles traveled generated by a project. And there's this thing called partial VMT, which sounds like we're making things difficult on purpose, but we're not. And we'll get into that in a couple of slides here. And then what projects should be screened out from VMT analysis because they are on the face of them, for example, considered to be less than significant for a number of reasons. And we'll get into what the technical advisory that OPR prepared, what they have provided for jurisdictions to consider on that front. Then what thresholds of significance should be chosen? Both project level thresholds of significance, and as you know, under CEQA, you also do a cumulative analysis. So you do what is the project's level, project's impact on the environment, and what is the project's contribution to cumulative impacts, which means, you know, the impacts in conjunction with other development over 10 or 20 years. We have a slide or two on that as well. And then finally, what kind of mitigation do we propose if we do have a VMT impact, a significant impact? I'll get to that in a couple of slides. As I said, CCTA has developed a really good guidance document that is very much in line with what a lot of other communities and agencies are using. It's very much in line with the technical advisory that was put out by the Office of Planning and Research, which it's important to remember this is an advisory. The OPR is not saying this is what you all have to do. They wanted to put out a guidance document. So every jurisdiction has the ability to make their own determinations on all of these questions. But CCTA took this, as well as, you know, going through a deliberate process of thinking about what makes sense for Contra Costa communities, and developed a guidance document that is generally in line with this technical advisory, but has some additional specifics that will be helpful to Moraga as you go through this process, I think. Okay, so a few slides on this issue of what is VMT, what are the types of VMT, what are the choices you could make, because you do have agency to make these decisions if you were to look at VMT impacts of a project. Total VMT relates to, you know, for example, an office project, you may have workers coming to and from the project, but you may also have vendor deliveries, you may have visitors, you may have the trips that people make once they're there to go out to lunch versus just their commute trips. There were reasons that the OPR considered, should we look at, for transportation impact purposes, should we look at the complete VMT generated by a project versus just maybe a commute VMT for office, or a home-based VMT for residential? Should heavy trucks be included? And of course, that is more important for uses like, you know, distribution centers and any kind of truck heavy use, but it's a question that OPR considered. And then one thing that is important for any VMT analysis approach is to remember to include the entire, whatever type of VMT you're looking at, make sure you include the entire trip length. And this interesting graphic here is at the Sacramento area, I believe. And it's showing the trip lengths that extend out way beyond whatever community this is. I'm not even sure what specific community this is. In other words, a model may capture only the VMT within the model area, which might be Sacramento County, for example. But there are trips that go down to Yolo County and up to Placer County. And, you know, in Contra Costa, there are going to be trips that go to other counties. And this is a really kind of a technical point, but whatever type of VMT we measure, we have to make sure we capture the entire, it's trip times trip length, right? So if the trip length goes outside the county and your model only captures the county VMT, we have ways, we transportation consultants, of making sure we capture that extra VMT. It's a pretty technical point, but I just wanted to include it. This is a kind of a simple graphic that illustrates what I was just talking about in terms of all VMT versus just partial VMT. For example, a household would generate trips going out, you know, to work. Maybe they go get coffee, then to work, then home, and then they get home and they go get gas. They go to the store and they come home. That's all the travel that household makes in a day. It's daily travel. Only home-based VMT would eliminate those trips that are made out there in the world that don't touch the house. And the reason this was considered as a potential good VMT metric for transportation impact analysis is that it's easily tracked by most travel demand models. And travel demand models are what CCTA, for example, MTC, some cities have their own citywide models. Most models can capture this kind of VMT pretty directly. And it's also potentially, you would think, you know, the kind of VMT that could be most, to say, affected by mitigation measures that you might propose. You know, like you might put some bike and ped improvements to a new housing development that would allow these people to make these trips that touch their home a little bit more by walking or a little bit more by biking. Not all of them, but maybe some of them. You're not going to probably be able to do much for a new housing development to affect how they get their coffee from work. So that's the idea behind maybe let's just focus on trips that touch the home for housing projects. Similarly, for office projects, just the commute trip, the person going to the office as opposed to all the other trips that the person might make from the office was also considered as a potentially appropriate metric for transportation impact evaluation for employment-based uses. And as we'll see in the next few slides, that is these partial metrics, these two here are actually what the OPR said could be appropriate. They don't mandate it. They say these could be appropriate metrics to use for cities and towns for their impact analyses. And the CCTA ended up adopting those partial metrics. Again, fairly easy to get out of the travel demand model, fairly easy to, not easy, but they're more aligned with what a city or a town may be able to control through conditions of approval and mitigation measures in terms of shrinking that VMT a little bit for that kind of project. This chart just shows that, you know, if we were to choose, as CCTA and OPR have said could be appropriate, these partial metrics, the home-based work, any home-based trip would be measured in the impact analysis for traffic. But for all the other CEQA topics, energy, greenhouse gas, and air quality, they need the total VMT. And that also can be captured by the travel demand model. Different models have different levels of difficulty in doing it, but generally traffic analysts need to provide this information to those analysts for those topics. But based on OPR and the CCTA guidance, we would provide these more kind of specific metrics, just the home-based trips for residential and just the commute trips for office projects. That would be the basis for the transportation impact analysis. So there's an inherent theoretical disconnect. You know, someone could say, if someone wanted to attack an EIR, well, this traffic analysis isn't really measuring, if you choose these partial metrics, this traffic analysis is not really measuring the same full VMT that the other topic areas are measuring. It's a well-known differentiator. And as I said, many communities are choosing to take these partial metrics as the way they're going to look at VMT for traffic purposes. But it's just something to point out because there's an argument that could be made that, you know, it'd be better to use the full VMT across all CEQA topics. Okay, there we go. Oh, it's animated. So I've been talking about project level VMT impact. So you measure the project, and we'll talk about what threshold of significance you use, but the project against some kind of baseline or some kind of average. The other way of looking at VMT, which would be appropriate for kind of retail projects or regional serving projects, and also for cumulative impacts, would be to look at the project effect on regional VMT. And these two illustrations, oh, I can't get them side by side, shoot. Show the difference. So first I'll show, you know, putting an example where you put a regional serving commercial use, for example, way over here, and you've got different kinds of land use, and it draws all sorts of trips. These are these arcs, these long trips, multiple trips from multiple locations to this new use. That's going to be a lot of VMT. It's a lot of trips, and it's kind of some long trip lengths, right? As opposed to putting a use that's more, we would call it local serving within an area that needs that use. Perhaps it's underserved, perhaps it's a place that doesn't have a grocery store or doesn't have any commercial and it's all residential. That's going to produce some VMT, but it's going to be a lower amount of VMT because people will make shorter trips, whereas they would have made other longer trips to a more regional location. this is essentially describing the project's effect on VMT. So while it may generate new VMT, and maybe it even generates new VMT that's not, you know, the appropriate threshold below the regional average that we're looking for. But if it reduces overall VMT as a result, then that's still a good outcome and could be demonstrated as a way to say, you know, that's a less than significant impact, depending on how Moraga chooses to apply its thresholds of significance. And in the case of Moraga, you know, a somewhat remote primarily residential community, there are certain uses that could potentially be, you know, fit this model of being a good fit for the community and reducing overall VMT within Moraga, and if not within Moraga, within perhaps all of Contra Costa County or all of Lamorinda. So that would be, this kind of analysis would be most appropriate for retail projects where, you know, maybe a small retail project is going to serve the Moraga community better than if it weren't there and people had to go far away or somewhere else. And it could also be appropriate for cumulative impact. It's essentially the way we would look at cumulative impacts. We would put this new project, whatever it is, into the 2040 model, CCTA model, and say, and look at and say, what does VMT at least stay the same or get lower with this new project in the location that we put it? Or does it increase regional VMT? And in a place like Moraga, it's quite likely that certain types of projects would reduce VMT on a VMT rate basis, basically. And by rate, I mean, you know, VMT per employee or VMT per service population. For retail uses, essentially, it's all VMT divided by all the employees and all the residents in the community. And so a use that's a good fit is going to, should, and you would expect it to, reduce VMT per surface population. Okay, a few slides on screening. Now, screening is where there are certain projects that you may be able to say, just on the face of it, through these criteria, don't require further VMT analysis. And this comes from the OPR guidance and CCTA's interpretation of the OPR guidance. The first way to screen would be, is your project in a low VMT area that you can demonstrate through, usually it's through a travel demand model map that kind of says, here's all the uses, here's what the model says the VMT rates are in various areas. Some of you may have heard of traffic analysis zones. That's what the model uses. They're usually, you know, areas that, let's say, you know, Ream Shopping Center would be in one traffic analysis zone. So they're not parcel level, but they, you know, they try to capture certain areas of Moraga and all of Contra Costa County in reasonable ways. So if we were to prepare, and we're working on this, if we were to prepare maps of Moraga from the CCTA model, and those maps showed that certain areas were a certain level below the regional average or the townwide average, and we'll get to what these thresholds might be, you could potentially say a project in that area doesn't need further VMT analysis, just based on what the model already shows us about where that project is. Just a preview, the OPR and CCTA guidance is saying that Moraga could choose a threshold of 15% below either the countywide average or the townwide average as its threshold of significance. Obviously, the latter would be an easier bar to pass, right? Because Moraga has probably got higher VMT rates in general than the county as a whole, just because of its distance from BART and so forth. But if Moraga used its own townwide average as the metric to compare against, it may be that there are certain areas of the town that would be below 15%. And theoretically, if we get to that point and we have maps that demonstrate that, then projects in those areas might be screened from a detailed VMT assessment. I'll just stop there and say, as with all things CEQA, you want to provide as much quote unquote substantial evidence for your findings as possible. So to the extent there's concern about the maps that get developed or it's right on the borderline, you know, if there are additional ways that you can, if you're doing a clearance of a project and you do want to try to demonstrate that it won't have a significant VMT impact, you might want to do additional analysis just to support that finding. But screening maps is is one proposed or recommended method of screening projects from VMT analysis that's in the OPR guidance document. Another way, and this unfortunately doesn't apply to Moraga currently, but I want to make you aware of it. Another screening criteria is if a project's within a half mile of a high quality transit line or a major transit stop like a rail or ferry station. A high quality transit line or transit corridor needs to have fixed route bus service with 15-minute headways during commute times. And I don't believe there are any corridors like that in Moraga currently, but it doesn't mean that might not be the case in the future. And it's something to keep in mind. It's a really important thing to think about, even though, you know, right now, I don't believe any areas in Moraga fall under this criteria. Finally, there are a couple of screening criteria for small projects. I know that sounds vague, but through the OPR guidance and CCTA's interpretation of it, employment-based uses that are 10,000 square feet or less, or about 20 units of residential project that's 20 units or less. There's a lot of leeway for interpretation in this particular criteria. I'm just kind of giving you the high level from CCTA, but we can get into you know, how this could be adjusted for Moraga's context. And then finally, local serving uses. And again, no bright line test here, but small retail, small uses that if there's substantial, like a market study, for example, if there's substantial evidence that can be presented that this use is designed to serve the local Moraga community, certainly will serve people from outside as well, but it's going to potentially serve trips that would otherwise potentially need to go outside Moraga. If there are ways to show that a project fits that bill, then that could also be screened out from detailed VMT analysis. Almost done here. I just wanted to make you aware of the OPR guidance document. The technical advisory made its way to a recommendation of 15% below the regional average as being an appropriate threshold of significance. What that means is a project could be compared again to the regional. It could be the townwide or the county or even the Bay Area if you so choose. If your project has a VMT rate, that means home-based VMT per resident for residential projects, or home work VMT, commute VMT for employment projects, that's 15% less than the regional average, then that would be less than significant. But there is research from the California Air Resources Board that has been done in the last few years that shows that, well, if you measure it cars and trucks combined, then 14.3% might fit the bill. If you measure cars only, maybe you need a little more than 15%, maybe you need this 16.8%. And it's all based on a lot of really technical math, and it's part science, part art. But I just want to make the point that the OPR technical advisory is one recommendation. It's the one that I would say most communities are going with, that there is evidence that you could use different thresholds. And there's ongoing research all the time. So, you know, stay tuned. A year from now, we may have other recommendations from OPR or ARB, but right now, this is the guidance that we have. Okay, a couple of words on mitigation measures for impacts, and then I'll show you the CCTA guidance just to kind of wrap it up. What I have here is the 28 recommended transportation mitigation measures from the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association Handbook on Reducing Greenhouse Gases. This is a Bible, a document that was prepared in 2010, and it just was updated literally at the end of 2021. It got its final version of the update. And these are measures, some of them are kind of project-based, and some of them are more kind of community-based, like things that Moraga would try to do on a community-wide basis to reduce VMT and therefore greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a summary of all the measures. The document itself has detailed fact sheets for each one of these, describing how you would actually analyze how much it could reduce VMT for a given type of project, and how much, there's also guidance on how much VMT reduction you could get when working together. Like say you apply 5 of these and each one of them has a potential 5% reduction. Well, you don't get to take a 25% reduction. You have to think about how they would work in combination. And, you know, because theoretically you could say you have 100% reduction if you apply enough of them. So a very technical document, a lot of research went into it. Farron Pierce was involved along with many others in updating the 2010 document. But this is kind of the laundry list of mitigation options that the town would have if you should analyze the general plan or a given project down the line and find that you have a significant VMT impact and need to apply mitigations to reduce the VMT impact. Mitigation, and here's a little image of the document. I have it. I'm happy to send it to Ashan and anyone who would like to look at it. The mitigations really boil down to 2 types of changes: built environment changes, whether it's the project itself, making it more dense. More dense residential projects tend to have lower trip generation and lower VMT for a number of reasons. I mean, it's not a given, but you know, a denser project might be more servable by transit and get a little bit better transit access, or be located in a location that's more walkable. And then transportation demand management, whether it's a residential or an employment project site. Are there things that you can do to encourage, through the carrot or the stick, less driving in single occupant vehicles, essentially? But we do need to remember that for CEQA mitigation to be considered effective, it needs to be considered feasible. So is it feasible to make the changes that might get proposed for VMT mitigation? And in the case of TDM, you know, we often in the past have recommended travel demand management measures for a residential project. Have a transportation coordinator who makes sure people know about their transportation options, that kind of thing. And most project mitigations of a TDM nature don't have like requirements that stay in place for 20 years and we make sure they're still doing it. Do we still have that concern with VMT impacts? Because unlike with level of service, you know, where we usually have calculated, here's how the intersection's operating now, here's how it might operate in the future, here's how we would fix it by putting in a new left turn lane. And we can demonstrate that would work because we have our analysis platforms to do that. And so it's kind of accepted that mitigation will work. With VMT, no one has figured out yet or said that we're going to be going out and measuring the VMT of projects ad infinitum for the next 20, 25 years to make sure our mitigations are working. So this is kind of a big question mark. As I said, this is all very new, VMT as an impact criteria. But the more evidence that we can provide when we're doing the CEQA document that the TDM should be effective and has been demonstrated to be effective in the past, that kind of thing, the better and more feasible and therefore effective the mitigation will be considered, I think, by anyone who might challenge an EIR on a project. Just a quick word on, this is not really part of this project, the Advanced Planning Initiative yet, but we're all of us in the transportation and CEQA community are thinking ahead to, you know, holistic ways of assessing impacts and assessing mitigations and providing mitigation for VMT, as opposed to a project by project approach. And that's kind of what Ashan referred to at the outset. So we're all familiar with traffic impact fee programs, you know, where you pay a traffic impact fee and it goes to, you know, provide a signal here and do some capacity improvements there. But you could have a VMT impact fee program, which provides things that are demonstrated to be good measures to reduce VMT by development in general. And a project could potentially pay into that fee. And it would provide, you know, transit subsidies, perhaps some bikeway gaps that really need fixing, and it would make it easier for people to bike from place to place, and pedestrian improvements and so forth. So a few communities are working on impact fee programs that are based on VMT impacts. And then if you had a program like that and a project paid the VMT impact fee, it could be demonstrated that that would reduce its significant impact to less than significant. A lot of things to do before you get to that point, but that is something to consider for Moraga. Two even kind of more out there ideas, but a few communities are working on them, are kind of a mitigation bank where, frankly, I won't say much about this because it's still pretty new. I'm not probably going to be very good at describing how it works, but basically paying into, it's quite a bit like a fee, but it just operates differently. And a mitigation exchange where maybe one project can do one thing, but it actually benefits another project more than it benefits its own project, but it has the ability to do it. So, exchanges, kind of the cap and trade approach, I guess, would be a good metaphor for that. We're not necessarily looking at any of these as part of this particular project, but it's something to start thinking about. And some communities are starting to think about it. Okay, two final slides. This flow chart is not meant to be read unless you can actually read it, but it's pretty straightforward and it just goes through the steps that I kind of described. This is CCTA's guidance document and Ashan has it. It basically follows the OPR screening guidance that I kind of alluded to earlier. And for the thresholds of significance, also follows the OPR guidance where it's just the partial VMT, home-based VMT per resident. And CCTA gives towns and cities the option to say, we'll set our bar 15% below the countywide average or the town average. As I said, the town average would likely be a lower bar to clear, but you have the choice to choose either. And similarly, 15% for commute trips to employment type projects. Again, you can either use the countywide average or the town average. And then a cumulative analysis per the CCTA guidance would only be required if there is a significant unavoidable project impact, meaning after mitigation, the project VMT impact can't be reduced to less than insignificant. In that case, you would then do a cumulative analysis where, as I said before, you would kind of do this holistic look at, well, how does the project affect the whole region? In this case, you probably wouldn't look just at Moraga, you'd probably look at the county as a whole. And you'd say, does this project remain the same or increase VMT rates for that type of use? So like say you put residential, near Ream Center, I'm just giving an example, and say that the project VMT impact can't be shown to be less than 15% below the townwide average, even with mitigation. Then we would put that project into the 2035 or 2040 travel demand model, and we would look at how it affects overall regional VMT, because it may be the case that even if it's a project significant impact, it doesn't affect the cumulative view in a significant way. Then it would still have a significant project impact, but it wouldn't have a significant cumulative impact. Or some other result may happen, but that's why we, just as we do with all CEQA analysis, we need to look at a project level and we need to look at the cumulative, but we only in this case need to look at the cumulative if you don't clear the project test. And then, as I've mentioned a lot, we talked about residential projects, employment-based projects, which really means kind of office, where people are generally working, which is a little different than retail. Say there's a cultural center or some kind of other unique use. OPR didn't go there, CCTA didn't really go there either. They talk about it, but they say you need to consider what this project's goals are, what it means to the community, what is appropriate in terms of a VMT impact assessment criteria. So don't have much more to say on that right now, but just something to keep in mind that we don't have a prescription for every single kind of project in this guidance, but some of the main ones, office, residential, and retail, we do. So just some things to think about. I wouldn't say these decisions need to be made tonight, but things to think about, and we can discuss them and then consider them going forward as we continue on this project. Does the CCTA guidance make sense for Moraga? I guess one key question is, do you want to use the town average as your kind of baseline to measure against or the countywide average. And then start thinking about those 28 CAPCOA TDM or transportation mitigation strategies and think about which ones are going to make the most sense for projects in Moraga. And then finally, and this is something that I haven't touched on yet, but it's a very important thing to think about as we conclude, and this is my last slide, is the CEQA approach for the general plan update and the housing element update. Back to that idea of holistic clearance and holistic mitigation, meaning the town as a whole. If the town wants to do this, as we develop the housing element update and we do the analysis, say we get to the point where we have a significant impact for the housing element, the RENA allocation and the housing element update and whatever other land use changes you might want to make as part of this general plan update. And we do the mitigation analysis and it's still significant, which it may be or may not be, but if it is still significant, we can't get down to that 15%. If the town chooses to make a statement of overriding considerations, which is a thing you do for CEQA documents if you have significant impacts, but you want to say we still want this project for these reasons and you list them out, then what that would do is as Asham alluded to earlier, help you streamline development that is consistent with the general plan. And I think this is a very, I'll say, good approach and worthwhile approach for you to consider. It does require you, if we get to that point, maybe we won't have a significant impact, but if we do, if you have good reasons to adopt the plan anyway, and you state what those reasons are, and you show that with our help that you've done everything and set out all the mitigations that make sense, and we'll do just everything that is feasible within Moraga's control to reduce VMT impacts from development in Moraga. That's really the most efficient way to mitigate the VMT impacts of development in Moraga, as opposed to the alternative, which would be to say, well, we're going to make a finding that these are significant impacts, but we're still going to require project by project environmental assessment for projects under this general plan down the line. It's kind of, it creates redundant and pretty inefficient work, I think, under the life of the general plan that we adopt. So this is something that a lot of towns and cities are considering, and I just want to put that out there for you all to think about. Again, decisions don't need to be made tonight, but it's a key question that we'll be revisiting with you as we go through this project. So that is it. I talked for a long time, it feels like. But time for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have any specific questions from commissioners? I again want to keep with the idea of asking just questions at this point, and then our comments can come after the public comment portion. So let's just get some clarification and some questions at this time.
To the chair.
Oh, go ahead.
May I just make a comment? We did staff introductions at the beginning, and I failed to mention that we also had Brett Swain from the Department of Engineering here tonight. He has also been working alongside with planning staff and the consultants to review the documents and provide input. So he's also here tonight to respond to any questions or comments.
Great, thank you. Okay, do we have any commissioner questions or clarification here? Okay, Commissioner Helber.
Thank you. And thank you for that very detailed presentation. My first question is about how the town establishes the town's baseline for VMT. I mean, the old way we just go out and count cars at the intersection, but now it sounds like we have to follow the cars and figure out how far they're going. How is that established for the town? And can we use the housing element to establish that for all projects going forward?
Yes, good question. Generally, the CCTA travel demand model would be used to establish the baseline. There are other ways, but if the plan is to use the model to do analysis of projects and of the housing element, then the model would be the appropriate way. The other ways, by the way, would be, streetlight data, and most of you hopefully have heard of, the big data vendors that can actually provide information on more than you can imagine, from transportation to everything else, most likely. And that is another source. And it's actually something we could look at in conjunction with the model to see how well the model is modeling Moraga. But in general, if the CCTA travel demand model is one of the better travel demand models that we've worked with. It's pretty well behaved and seems to be giving reasonable results in most communities. So that would be the starting source.
Okay. My next question was on the screening maps, but I think I was basically looking at the housing element update, and can we use that to establish screening maps where projects inside those, I think you called it, established low VTA areas would be exempt. But then later on, I read that a residential development less than 20 units would also be exempt. So are we going to use the housing element to establish screening areas?
As part of our work, we have already started working on looking at what the CCTA map model shows in terms of VMT generation by traffic analysis zone for both residential uses and office uses in Moraga. And I don't know yet whether we're going to generate those. They may or may not show that there are clear-cut areas that are clearly 15% or more below the town average, let alone the county average. But as soon as we have those maps, we'll show them to you. And if they look usable and good for screening, then we'll recommend doing that. Okay. The 20 unit is a different kind of screening. It's just for small projects. And I can get into the reasons that OPR kind of set that threshold, but that's a different screening criteria.
You described this. I have one more general question and then one specific question about the old way we did things. You described there's a project generation way of applying BTM, or there's a project effect way of applying BTM. And my question is, I'm sure we're going to pick one way that works for the general plan update, but my concern is if we establish that as the precedent, how does that work for individual projects when they come down the road?
It's a good question. The project generated VMT is generally what you use for the project effect. For the project generated impact criteria. So you basically take the baseline model, say it's 2020, and you put the project into it, and you see, does the project in that location with that transportation context, does the model say that it generates VMT that's 15% below the townwide average or not? The project's effect on VMT would be if you need to do a cumulative analysis and you put it into the future model, and then you would look at it more in a regional way. How does it affect the regional VMT per total service population in the county, for example? You could also look at the project's effect on VMT. So you're looking at all the VMT generated in all the roads in all of Contra Costa County. When you put, for example, maybe a larger retail site in Moraga. Because retail is not as these partial metrics for residential and office. Retail is kind of its own thing. If it's small local serving, you can probably screen it out. If it's a large retail site, you'd want to look at, for example, let's use an extreme example. Putting a Costco in Moraga, probably never going to happen. Big regional serving use, right? But it actually could end up reducing this countywide VMT because people that are going all the way out to Concord or wherever they're going, a lot of them would go to Moraga. Let's not talk about all the other effects of that, but so that could theoretically reduce the countywide VMT. So large retail projects or cumulative effects of any project, that's where you would look at the project's effect on countywide VMT.
Okay. My last question is, with the old level of service analysis, if we had hypothetically a project that just dumped everything out into one intersection, we could calculate that project's contribution and say, okay, now you need to pay X amount to help do whatever offsite improvements we need to do to make this particular intersection functional? I understand VMTs is now looking at regional. But do we lose the ability to assess local impacts and a functional sense of vehicular congestion and how it works?
You do not. The only thing that changes is that you can do that analysis and require projects to, or ask/require projects to contribute to their impacts on capacity outside of the CEQA process. It would be part of the general plan compliance process and the permitting process.
And I'd like
So-
to chime in. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
go ahead.
Just wanted to say, Commissioner Helber, that's a really important question that you just asked. And the answer is also really important, which is that what we're essentially saying is you don't do this as part of your EIR, but you still can require it for a development project, and you can still establish metrics to evaluate the level of service through your general plan. So we may, in the transportation element update, still have LOS standards. They're just not CEQA thresholds anymore.
So we have to foresee potential projects and include something outside of CEQA in the general plan to make sure we capture potential down the road issues.
Assuming the town still wants to use LOS to do that. You don't have to do that, clearly, but most smaller suburban communities are choosing to do that.
All right. Thank you. It's very informative. I appreciate it.
No more questions. Commissioner Helber? That's good. Okay, you're good. Do we have any other questions or clarifications from commissioners? Well, I have one since I'm not seeing any hands. If I could ask briefly, what were you referring to when you said it isn't mandatory? So the new VMT methodology is set by California pertaining to CEQA. Now we're taking away it was LOS, right? Moving to VMT. What were you referring to when you said something isn't mandatory to do? Because I feel like-
Is that what I just said? Is that?
No,
Chair-
initially when,
okay.
yeah, Ms. Polling was talking.
Good question. What I meant is, again, from the outset, I think I said, you'd think, okay, it's VMT, straightforward, it's just a different metric. There's a lot, it took me, 45 minutes to describe a lot of technical decisions you could make on how you measure it, what threshold you use, how you mitigate it. We've got we've got the advisory from OPR and we've got the CCTA guidelines. The OPR advisory is just an advisory, but it does, a lot of communities have just been, saying, great, we're happy to have this advisory, we're generally going to follow it. The CCTA guidelines take the advisory and essentially follow it as well, with some considerations for communities to consider. And I believe that the CCTA guidance does say that you need to at least adopt what they're recommending or something more stringent in terms of threshold of significance, or return to source funding may be at risk. But even so, lead agencies have the absolute right to select their own VMT metrics, thresholds of significance, and mitigation strategies. So that was the main point I wanted to make.
Got it. Working within the VMT is essential because that is the new way that
That
CEQA
is
reviews.
true. Yeah.
Got it. So we have some options within that. Okay. And then VMT, as Commissioner Helber was saying, and I spoke with Planning Director Hamid earlier about this, doesn't really address traffic and congestion. And so I know we can do that as a town when we review, but does CEQA now not address congestion traffic, solely trips and miles?
Well, yes, if you think about it, and not to be cute about it, but I mean, it does address congestion just in a way that's, more meta, I guess you'd say. Actual congestion at intersections and on roadways is no longer an allowed metric under CEQA. But it is not prohibited for towns and cities to use just outside CEQA, and many towns and cities are doing so. And you think, well, doesn't that shoot yourself in the foot? You know, if you're, what this new paradigm is really asking communities to do is look at things a little more comprehensively. You're going to need to look at VMT and think about the environment and think about ways to reduce VMT. You can still look at things you need to do to make your roadway network function. Again, if the Costco goes in, you need a new signal, right? You know, and you need a new, and nobody would dispute that. So, but the art is in the balance of both of those things.
Okay. Okay, so if we have no more, oh, okay, we're going to go Commissioner Davis.
Madam Chair, Ms. Boyling, I wanted to ask a clarification question if I could. I'm going to start with the assumption that any residence we build adds to the VMT because a family moves into that. The reason that the VMT program is going to work is because we're not worried about the net add. We're worried about the value of that add relative to a regional metric. And as long as we are better than 85%, then it's seen as a regional win. That's correct?
Well, 15% is the recommended percentage.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So we're trying
per resident. Yeah.
Correct. So we want to be at 85% or below would be lovely. Okay. We've already had some discussion about how we establish that those scales. And my understanding from what you've said is pretty much there is a lot of latitude on how we set our scale, but once we've set it, we then stick to it. Is that more or less correct? That is.
Yes, well, if you were to choose 15%, then until you decide to choose a different percent, that would be your percent threshold. The question you asked is interesting though, because the baseline, you know, we're going to set a baseline as part of this project, this general plan update. And it's going to say right now, the travel demand model, whatever year it is, 2020, says that the regional countywide VMT per resident is X. The townwide VMT per resident is Y. And then, you know, if a project goes in or with your housing element, you get Z, and you compare those three. The point about the baseline that I wanted to make is that, say, 5 or 10 years from now, we probably have a model update. The models get updated periodically with new land use information, either as part of a new Plan Bay area or just, you know, every 10 years, they try to keep the models fresh. It's important to use the baseline that's appropriate when you do the traffic analysis for a new project. And 10 years from now, that baseline might be something different. And I know that's very disheartening and scary to hear. But, you know,
especially when it takes 5 years to build a building.
Keep our analysis fresh, basically.
Yes.
Luckily, models aren't getting updated every 3 years. So it's usually a 5 to 10 year process.
So what I don't understand is the mechanism by which we count a single residence, for instance, potential vehicle miles traveled, when we don't know how many workers there will be in that residence, how far they'll go to which jobs, whether they go to Costco in Concord or Safeway in Moraga. There's so many variables about the individual behavior magnified across the more than 20 units that I don't understand the principle or the metric by which that number is arrived at. How do we find a number that we can then mitigate?
Well, as I said, the travel demand model, CCTA countywide travel demand model is the tool of choice for this kind of analysis in Contra Costa County. But as I also mentioned, it can be, the town has the choice to do an off model, a different approach using perhaps just streetlight data, you know, where you get this data dumped from a vendor and you look at, say, you know, the travel characteristics of all the residential parcels around Green Center. I'm just jumping on that one for an example.
Okay.
And use that as your baseline and compare it to the countywide data from Streetlight. the problem with that, well, there's more technical considerations that I can get into tonight. We have travel demand models for a reason, and when we feel they're well validated, they're usually the best tool. There
I
are
do
some
understand the
really bad travel demand
baseline.
models that we wouldn't recommend using, but the CCTA model is a pretty good one.
And the baseline approaches, those were pretty clear. What I don't understand is how we devise the anticipated VMT for a project as opposed to the baseline against which we're measuring it.
If there were unique, it would get down to what do we know about the project? The project applicant with the town and the consultants that work on that project could provide information that say, based on demographics in the market study for this new project, we think 20% are going to telecommute. A traffic analyst could say, okay, well, typical telecommuting in Moraga is 10%. If you have compelling evidence that there's going to be 20% telecommuting or different travel characteristics from this project's residents, that could get, it's all about that substantial evidence that CEQA requires.
So the new retirement center that we're in the process of getting started would be a real easy win under a VMT model, because most of those people aren't driving most of the time. Okay.
Right. And the model can deal with those kinds of uses to an extent, but then we also have ways to factor in the fact that if it's a senior housing facility and there's only 10% of the residents even have cars, we could make the model reflect that.
Okay. Right. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Hey, thank you. Is it best if we sort of go item by item to get comments from the planning commissioners, for things that you're looking for some clarification in direction wise, in terms of the percentage you want to look at, in terms of the, the metrics that you want to use? Should we do that based from your appendix 1? Should we go through each of those, or are you just looking for just things that have hit us and you want some comments and you'll go from there? Maybe nothing specific, or what would be most useful for?
I'll let Ashan and Barry also chime in, but I think just general responses to what you've heard and this idea of the 15%. I mean, that's a pretty, I don't want to force it on you, but it is from the OPR and CCTA pretty clear guidance. The big key question there is, do you want to compare your projects to your own town average or the county average? As I said, if you compare to the county average, it's going to be less likely that projects will have less than significant impacts. It'll still be kind of a challenge, even if it's just the townwide average, but that's a key question. And I know other communities, well, one in particular I shouldn't name, has already said we're going to compare ourselves to our own city average, not the county, for reasons that might be kind of obvious. But,
so if you were to use the county number, making it harder to show a less than significant impact, would that then sort of thwart development efforts? Because then there's that next level of review or permits, CEQA review that has to be done.
Yeah, it would have one of two potential effects. It would either make it harder to screen a project, and even if a project can't be screened, like in other words, you don't even have to do the analysis, it would potentially make it harder to mitigate down to 15% below, just because the bar would be higher.
If I can just chime in as well, if you use the town average for the 15%, you're going to exempt or streamline a much larger number of projects. Because if you think about the types of projects that we're envisioning through the housing element, they're mostly higher density projects that are located in the Moraga Center specific plan area and the Ream area, places that are going to be, they're going to generate fewer VMT probably than a project that is a single family home with a 4-car garage or whatever, because there'll be smaller units that are designed to make it possible to walk to Safeway or to walk to a restaurant or to walk to the school or to possibly take a bus to the BART station and so on. So that's the pro of using 15% of the town average. Whereas projects that are large lots on open space are going to have a more negative impact. If you use the countywide average, that threshold is going to be harder to meet. So you're going to be requiring more of those projects to go through a VMT analysis that otherwise might just say, well, this was analyzed in the general plan and it's consistent with the general plan. Therefore, we don't have to do a separate VMT analysis because it's already consistent and it's been done and we met the threshold. They can still be required to do a traffic study and parking study, but they won't be required to do a VMT analysis because they've met the threshold. So I think that's really kind of a way of putting it, just sort of into black and white terms about the implications of one or the other. I did want to also come back, Chair Lester, to your original question about the type of feedback with some context, which is we will be coming back to you in the next couple of months with something that's a little more fleshed out that is actually a VMT policy that answers some of these questions that will eventually go to council. So to the extent we can get some at least initial direction now, that'll help us draft that. And this is the 15% as a basic question. I think there were one or two others that were in Ellen's memo and presentation. I don't think we want to do a deep dive into the screening criteria or anything like that at this point. It's pretty technical stuff.
Okay. Were the three issues the total versus partial VMT? Was that one of them? Auto versus truck VMT, or are those too specific? And you just want to know the percentage then? Get some direction. We'll just say this. We'll start.
think-
Yeah, I mean, I
Go
think
ahead,
that's the
Ellen.
main one. Because, yeah, the total versus partial is kind of laid out in the CCTA guidelines. You know, it's pretty straightforward when you do that and why.
Okay.
I
we
think
don't want
the other one was the TDM measures that might be most applicable to Moraga. In other words, what combination of carpooling or providing carpool spaces, or I mean, there are all these different measures. I think Ellen laid out a menu of 20 or so different measures that could be required. It's having a look at that list and saying which one of these things, or which 4 or 5 are the best fit for Moraga and should be included in a mitigation program. I'd say it's less critical that we get feedback on that right now at this point in time. That's something that, will be sorted out in the future. So I'd focus more just on that 15% above all.
Okay. All right. Do any commissioners have any thoughts on the 15%? Commissioner Davis?
I'd like, before we get to the 15%, if I may, I'd like to ask us to reconsider some of those 20 or so mitigations by starting right with buses. How many buses serve Moraga in a single day? Let's use 2019 before they cut 2 lines. 2019, how many buses ever came to Moraga in a day? Anybody know?
I don't have a number for you.
Thank you.
Carl, while they're looking that up, can I ask a question of Brenda?
Yes.
Do we need to go to public comment on this item?
Oh, probably.
Is there any public?
That's right. We were going to. I mean, there is nobody there. Did we get any emails? I know I didn't get a chance to see that last email that Director Afshan Hamid sent.
No, we did not get any public comments on this item.
Okay. Is there a formality that I should just open it for the sake of opening
Yes,
it? And then,
you need to open it and close it.
okay, let's do that really quickly while we're looking up numbers. And I, at this time, will open public comments, and anyone that would like to speak, use the raise hand feature. You have 3 minutes. State your name and address for the record. I see no attendees. So at this time, I will close the public comment and we will come back to the commissioners for additional comments and direction. I was gonna say for this list, the things that stuck out for me were increasing residential density, of course, in the areas that we are talking about increasing density already. Improve street connectivity. I think that's really important if we're not going to add streets, that we can at least make the streets connect, because there is one way to go through this town in any direction. It seems like it's very difficult to get around. Provide ride sharing program. That triggered for me school buses. If we were somehow able through the town or the county to get that covered, it is very expensive to have a school bus. So it's probably about $1,000 a child per year to have your child ride a school bus right now. And that's not how it is in every town across America. Typically they're paid for. So some sort of school bus function would be huge, because as you know, most of our congestion is during 8 a.m. when school starts and 3 p.m. when it ends. Every road is covered in cars picking up or dropping off their children. Providing pedestrian network improvement. That's just, of course, keeping those sidewalks coming. There are some missing sidewalks in my neighborhood in particular, which I would really like to have. And some more along the main streets as well. There are the biking lanes, but the actual sidewalks are minimal. And so it's a little bit dangerous for pedestrians. And then I was going to say also the extend transit network coverage and hours and increase the transit service frequency is really important. Commissioner Davis, like you mentioned. And those were the things that stuck out for me in terms of those mitigation strategies.
We're not even on the list of cities that AC Transit serves. So I'm going to suggest, unless we can require projects to coordinate with AC Transit for buses, discussing buses is pretty silly. How many of us in this meeting were taking the BART regularly in 2019, 2017, anytime like that during commute hours? How much excess capacity were there on those trains? About zero, maybe?
None.
So planning on the BART as a mitigation for housing in Moraga is also not realistic. I would
claim a conflict of interest in responding to anything about BART.
okay. I would also make the comment that there's no parking at BART, which makes it a challenge to use the BART train. I won't say impossible. I just got there at 4 a.m. so I could park. When we take these valuable public transit assets into account, I would like to insist that they actually be realistic and viable, because they aren't at this time. And if we can change that, by God, that would be the best thing in the world. I'm a strong believer in public transit. We don't happen to have any, and we should not base our planning on it until we do.
So
Okay.
just briefly, if I may address that, we have County Connection, which runs a route from Orinda BART through Moraga and around to Lafayette, and then turns around and runs back for transit every day on a half-hour schedule. So we do have an existing County Connection route that runs through Moraga, up Moraga Way, and it goes into Orinda. Goes from BART station to BART station through Orinda. So you get about 106 trips a week, because on the weekends, they only do 6 trips.
Okay, that's great to know about. I just didn't, I went on the internet and looked for AC Transit when I moved here and was limited.
Yeah, so it'd be County Connections.
Okay. No, I didn't know about County Connection.
And County Connection just announced, I think last week, they're eliminating one of the lines to Moraga. I think it was the 603. So County Connection is not really our friend here. They've also increased their headways quite significantly over the last 2 years. They do very little for us, frankly, in my opinion.
Let's try to get back to the 15% issue.
There we go.
What does it look like, or can you go 10% or 20%? What does that look like on this spectrum?
That's exactly the kind of discussion you have. And in the town of Vallejo or the city of Vallejo, they chose an interim threshold of no worse than citywide average, as opposed to requiring development to outperform the citywide average. It's early days in the implementation of this, and many cities have not even adopted their own thresholds. There's risks to doing that because you've got that OPR guidance out there saying 15% below is, they don't mandate it, they just say it might be reasonable. In the case of Vallejo, the rationale was that, you know, they don't want to thwart development, good development, and until they can do a citywide process where, you know, like I described earlier in the presentation, you potentially look at your overall citywide development impact, do all you can to mitigate it at a citywide level, and then accept the significant impact with overriding considerations. Until they're able to do that, they wanted to at least say, we'll just require development to perform as well as, if not better than, the citywide average, but we're not going to require it to be 15% below. So I don't know personally of any other cities that have done that, but I believe that's not the only example. So that would be a statement on the part of Moraga that we want to promote good development, but we're not going to set this bar at a level that can't be achieved. You would still really need to show that you require development to mitigate to the extent feasible. Because, you know, if you're going to be challenged on a project approval and you haven't done that, it's a pretty big vulnerability on your CEQA document. But you do have that, you have to have that choice.
Yeah, so through the chair, I just want to make some comments here. What we're having tonight is an informational session. It's a study session. And we're bringing all these topics to you because as we move forward, you know, we're going to have a site assessment because there's just to do that and to meet RENA numbers. So what we're really looking at is right now just theoretical policies. So there's policies coming forward, and what we're trying to do is align the technical with these policies that are coming forward. So I think what we are asking for again is just some general guidance. And, you know, maybe tonight we're not really ready to get into the real detailed weeds, and we need a couple more meetings because the next couple meetings and council will be pretty critical because there'll be a little bit more discussion and more direction. But we want to get this early discussion in so that we are thinking about all the different layers that we need to evolve as we're moving forward with the policy as well.
Okay. I would suggest then that we table the issue in terms of our discussion as a commission on the 15% until we get a recommendation from the consultants. And, you know, of course, they would base that on the size of our town and what they see here. But unless somebody has a very strong feeling about offering up a percentage at this point, we can move on to the next item.
Yeah, and I also want to clarify that what we're looking at in terms of policies and the housing element is for the next 8 years. And we're trying to align that with the 2050 plan from the Bay Area 2050 plan. So what we're really looking at in terms of policies are the 8 years, but it's all aligning with the bigger Bay Area 2050 plan, which there's a lot of issues that take into consideration, not just Moraga, but regionally and then countywide, and then also with statewide goals. So I think all that needs to be taken into account in terms of determining what we want to do, and also in terms of, you know, what mitigation measures we have. You know, I realize, and I think it's valid to consider what we have today, but I think what the state is asking us to do is look at our plans for the future years coming forward.
Okay. Any other comments from commissioners before we move on, unless we need to answer something more specifically for you, Ms. Poling, Mr. Miller, anything? We can move on to the next item if you feel comfortable. Commissioner Helber?
I just wanted to encourage staff. I heard Mr. Miller and Ms. Poling allude to, there's an opportunity to use the housing element to encourage, or at least to do the heavy lifting of the analysis to establish these vehicles mile traveled, and potentially, even if there is a statement of overriding consideration because there's significant impact, once that is done, the town would be in a position where we are encouraging development that is compliant with the general plan and potentially, hopefully, expediting that review. And projects that weren't compliant would have to go through that review. If we can use the housing element to accomplish that, I'm very supportive of that.
I'll confirm that that is our goal here. And this is intended as a streamlining measure. I know as you hear the presentation and think about the additional analysis that has to happen, it may not sound like streamlining, but at the end of the day, that's the intent and that's the goal, is if projects are consistent with the general plan and the assumptions that went into the VMT analysis that was done for the general plan, then they are streamlined.
Okay.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And Commissioner Helber brings up a good point, and it's a major point. And I think that's the kind of direction we're looking at.
Okay, so we will wait for our next review of that to make any more critical decisions. Thank you for that informative presentation. It's a lot to think about and understand. Let's go ahead and move on to item B under public hearing. This is consider adoption of resolution, don't know the number yet, recommending the town council adopt an ordinance of Title 8 Planning and Zoning establishing Chapter 8.178 Model Water Efficient Landscaping in order to require water efficient landscaping design and irrigation practices consistent with the requirements of the state of California. And staff, I'm going to let you give us a presentation.
And thank you, Chair Luster. Again, tonight we have a lot of state requirements, and this is the Model Efficiency Landscape Ordinance. It's a state mandate as of 2015, and MWELO is also part of the Climate Action Plan, the town's Climate Action Plan. And it is therefore also a part of the town council goals. And then newly added is Senate Bill 1383 through Recycle Smart, which is implementing it at a countywide level. And the regulations require the implementation and adoption of MWELO. So just to give you a small window, we've been on an annual basis, we submit reports, but we haven't adopted the actual ordinance. So adopting the actual ordinance will help us align with practices that we're already doing and conducting and formalize it tonight. So in general, the purpose of MWELO is to conserve water, reduce water consumption in urban areas, encourage native plants and groups of plants according to water usage, and use smart principles for irrigation and conservation. So Mio Mendez is the lead planner on this, and staff is doing this in-house. And after tonight, it will go to council on January 12th with your recommendation. Thank you. Mio, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, good. I didn't like those headphones anyways. Yes, like Director Hamid had said, my name is Mio Mendez. I'm the town's assistant planner, and today I will be giving a short PowerPoint presentation on MWILO. So. All right, can everybody see that? All right, so today for our presentation, we'll be going over the different sections of our presentation. We'll include a request, the ordinance background, some discussion items, CEQA requirement, and our recommendation, staff's recommendation. So let's get right into it. So the request is to consider adoption of resolution unknown. I apologize, I should say 2022. Recommending that the town council adopt an ordinance of Title 8 Planning and Zoning, establishing Chapter 8.178 Model Water Efficient Landscaping in order to require water efficient landscaping design and irrigation practices consistent with the requirements of the state of California. With that being said, just quick background information. MWILO was actually created in 1993. And it was from the 1990 Water Conservation Landscaping Act. However, in 2015, the state of California, through Governor Brown, adopted Executive Order B/29/15, which tasks the Department of Water Resources to update the MWILO regulations to increase water efficient standards and new and existing landscapes through more efficient irrigation systems, gray water usage, on-site stormwater capture, and by limiting portions of landscaping that could be covered in turf. So then along those lines in 2016, the state of California also adopted Senate Bill 1383, which is the California Short-Lived Climate Pollutant Reduction Law, which also requires MWILO to be adopted and enforced. And then lastly, the actual ordinance lives in California Code of Regulation, Title 23, Division 2, Chapter 2.7, and Section 65595, and so on. The purpose of water efficient landscape ordinance is to increase water efficiency and improve environmental conditions in the built environment. This can be accomplished by planting, residential and non-residential landscapes with taking into consideration plant factors, irrigation methods, irrigation efficiency, and areas associated with each hydrozone. Plants with similar characteristics, including water requirements, rooting depth, climate suitability, being grouped on properties creating hydrozones, providing the proper irrigation method and efficiency to adequately maintain a healthy landscape and prevent irrigation water from leaving the property. The ordinance also reviews water features, including pools, spas, ponds, waterfalls, fountains, lakes, and artificial streams. And by, by completing the required steps, property owners will know their estimated total water use and will not violate their maximum applied water allowance. And these are major issues that need to be reviewed and enforced through MWILO. So in order for a project to be reviewed under the MWILO requirements, the project will have to be one of two things. It'll have to be considered a new construction project with an aggregated landscaping area equal to or greater than 500 square feet. So new construction is defined as a new building with landscape or new landscape such as a park, playground, or green belt without an associated building, or rehabilitated landscape projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet. Rehabilitated landscape is defined as any re-landscaping project that requires a permit, plan check, or design review, and the modified landscape area, all planting areas, surface turf areas, and water features is equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet. So once we get into MWELO, we're really looking at 6 different elements that need to be submitted, 6 document packages. First one being the project information kind of package that'll include the date that it was submitted, the project applicant, address, kind of your standard information. However, it does also include a small indemnification agreement, which states the applicant's signature and date with statement that, quote, I agree to comply with the requirements of the water efficient landscaping ordinance, and submit a complete landscape document package. So that's when we get into what the document package really is. So the first thing we want to talk about is your water efficient landscape worksheet. And so that's where we get into your hydrozone information table, your water budget calculations, and that's where we get into your maximum applied water allowance and your estimated total water use. And then after that, we have a soils management report, a landscape design plan, irrigation design plan, and a grading design plan. All of these documents will require to be submitted with a certificate of completion. This would need to be completed by a licensed landscape design professional, and these are people that are licensed with the state of California. So CEQA for this, because it's an ordinance that's being adopted, the proposed municipal code amendments are exempt from provisions of the California Environmental Quality Act, Public Resource Code, section 21,000, and so on. CEQA pursuant to the Public Resources Code, section 21080.17, and CEQA guidelines, section 15158.282H. So lastly, staff's recommendation. Staff recommends that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the Town Council adopt an ordinance amending section, that should just say adopting establishing chapter 8.178, the Model Water Efficient Landscaping Ordinance, in order to require water efficient landscaping design and irrigation practices consistent with the requirements of the state of California. And with that, I can answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you. So am I to understand that basically the ordinances by the state have been adopted and we just have to update our ordinances to be in line with state law?
That is correct.
And are there any portions of this that we have any ability to change or modify?
So what we are doing is simply complying with the state law. And we're aligning ourselves with the state law. The state ordinances are already pretty technical and they're very thorough. So, I've spent numerous hours going through them. And what we're doing is adopting by reference only. So in the future, if the state ones get updated with new formulas or new technical information, we will always be in compliance with the state.
Okay, do we have any specific questions for staff before we open us up to public comment? Okay, Commissioner Davis.
Ma'am, thank you, Director Hamid. The comment you just made about us incorporating by reference only was my very first question. That's perfect. Where did the number 2,500 square feet come from?
It's from the state.
Is that from the state? Okay.
Yes.
I will submit that's probably not negotiable. Thank you.
Mayor Bodie.
Yes. Yes, thank you. 3 questions. First one was just around why did we wait so long to adopt the ordinance? And perhaps when did we first have the opportunity to adopt this ordinance to be in line with the state? Number two is just around, how do we enforce compliance? And maybe that's for another, a topic for another discussion. And then I read each of the elements on the matrix of all the items that need to be approved. And I think it would be helpful, Mio, to just understand, because it doesn't seem like each one of them is a new element that needs to be approved, within the matrix. Which ones of those are new, right? So what's the delta between what currently needs to be, included in the application by the landscape architect versus what's the delta now, right? So, I guess what I'm asking, what's the additional burden on a person that wants to do landscaping work?
Okay.
So let me take your first two questions. The reason why we waited so long is we have limited staff in Moraga.
Okay.
For the last about 8 months, we've been understaffed. And our projects have an increasing workload. It comes down to prioritizing and working with council to set goals and priorities. And this has become a goal and priority because not only is it in our climate action plan, but it's also now because of SB 1383. So it's moved up to the priority list, and like all the other cities in Contra Costa County, we're adopting it by reference only. So I think it's a straightforward request. How do we enforce compliance? So what we'll do is the way we do other projects in terms of we create an application. In the application, we ask for a certain number of items and we put the burden on the applicant. So the applicant needs the self-certification through a California licensed landscape architect or civil engineer. They may do that. And then during the building permit process, we verify all the calculations and we review them. And then for the matrix of elements in terms of which is new, I think Mr. Mendez was putting up that slide for reference only because we are creating a process at a staff level. So that's something really that we're doing at a staff level, and we're trying to comply with the requirements for MWILO. So Mio, did you want to add anything?
Actually, you covered 99% of it very well. The only addition I would add to that is to be more specific about enforcement, about when we would actually take these plans into consideration. It's basically at the entitlement phase. So that's where we would start tracking these things.
Okay, thank you. And Vice Chair Hillis.
So I'm just wondering here, just for folks that want to remain honest with the way the rules are set out. So correct me if I'm wrong on this. So now, if you have, for example, you're installing a sprinkler system over 2,500 square feet of yard, you don't need a permit. But with MWILO put in place, you would have to know that would require a permit, or am I misunderstanding?
Okay, to answer that question, you're going to have to be a little bit more specific about 2,500 square feet of just irrigation, because what it comes down to is a full rehabilitation of landscaping. And that's also only by if that landscaping, that rehabilitation of landscaping is a part of a project that requires an entitlement.
Or building permit.
Got it. Thank you.
Correct.
Okay. Any
But
other?
if I could ask clarification, Milo, I think it's a permit or design review. Is that correct?
Correct.
Do we require a landscape plan as part of an application to be deemed complete?
Yes, in the sense that we wouldn't provide a final sign off unless we had a project that required MWELO review to submit for that review.
I just wonder if there's some unintended consequences, because there's no two ways about it. This is very onerous and a lot of work, not only for applicants, but for the town staff to review. And 500 square feet of aggregate landscape is nothing. And I think we need to be very careful about who has to comply with this. And if it's just design review triggers it, maybe we need to look at what we require landscape plan for.
Another point worth making, Commissioner Hillis was talking about 2,500 square foot of irrigation, which does not require a building in association. That would be 500 feet of irrigation that would be triggered by a building. So your average 3 DUA property in Moraga, the homeowner wants to redo his yard. He now has a project that cannot be done by his regular gardeners and landscapers anymore. It's going to take a licensed engineer. We've just put a $5,000 price tag in addition to the actual work on that project.
Is that how it works? Is it triggered by a typical single-family resident landscaping update? Or is it, I'm reading it and it's a little convoluted. It'll say new construction, new, so if you could just clarify, let's go very carefully through the language. And I don't know if this language is state regulated in your definition, or if it's something we wrote. Trying to find your language here.
Yeah, through the chair, this is the state language.
Okay.
This is what the state requires.
Okay, so how did you interpret it then? It applies to every single family residence that wants to update their landscaping?
It's the state established the minimum thresholds for the square footages.
Okay. Let me find the language. Hold on.
So actually, if I may give a slight bit of clarity there. So it talks about a new construction project being something that didn't previously exist. So it wouldn't be a home addition. It wouldn't be, a remodel, things of that nature when associating a landscaping with that project per se. But what it comes down to is if you're building a new home, a new structure that is greater than 500 square feet. And then when it's talking about landscaping, 500 square feet of new landscaping, that would be more so considered such as a park, a playground, or a green belt with an associated building.
I think you're scrambling that. That's actually not what your staff report says at all.
I just read it from my staff report.
A new construction is defined as a new building
With 500 square feet.
with a landscape.
It's not a 500 square foot building at all. It's 500 square feet of landscaping with a new building. Or it's 2,500 square feet on an existing property, parks and playgrounds irrelevant.
Mio, isn't it section 10B on page 12? Under section 4.9? That's the actual state code, right?
I'm sorry, what were you looking at there?
I believe your Barclays California Code of Regulations that you included in the package as Appendix 10B.
What page are you on there?
Uh,
Of the code?
The staff report says page 12, the page number is page 38, but it's section 49.1 applicability. And it's A1. And it's with a landscape area of 500, new construction projects with a landscape area of 500 square feet.
Right.
I'm sorry, greater than 500 square feet. And then later on page 38.1, landscape area is exclusive of, it looks like hardscape. Does not include building footprints, structures, sidewalks, driveways, parking lot, decks, patios, gravel, stone walks. So it does sound a little bit, not as strenuous.
Right.
Which is good, but that's still a lot of calculations for us to do.
Okay, so I think we are, based on this language, it is new construction projects, so not additions. Even though that's considered a new construction, but it's very specific. New construction projects with an aggregate landscape area equal greater than 500 square feet. And then new construction under this same bullet point is defined as a new building with a landscape or other new landscape, such as a park or playground or green belt. So we are going to confirm then that this cannot be interpreted as an addition to an existing building, unless it's a landscape. If it's a park on a building, it can. But in terms of the actual structures, this is a new structure in its entirety, new structure only.
That is
It can
correct.
also be rehabilitated landscape projects with an aggregate landscape area equal to or greater than 2,500 square feet.
So that,
So there's flexibility there. And this is straight from the state code.
Okay.
Appendix B or attachment B is the state code. So we are confirming here tonight. And existing landscapes. So that's what it is.
so then if a home or a business was to redo their landscaping on an area 2,500 square feet or larger, it would trigger
That's right.
the
Yeah.
MWELA.
That's right.
And the code also notes that if it requires a building or landscape permit, plan check, or design review. So if it is a landscape redo that doesn't otherwise require a permit and would not otherwise be before the planning department, it would not trigger these requirements.
Correct.
So my new understanding would be then, it could be a 3,000 square foot new irrigation project. As long as all it was new irrigation, then it would not trigger. Is that accurate? If it did not have a pool or a water feature?
Yes, if there was nothing in the landscape work that would otherwise trigger a permit from the town or the county, which I believe just a standard irrigation project would not, then it would not trigger.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. That's a clarification I had not grasped. Thank you.
Okay.
And that gets back to, I think, Commissioner Helber's question. One of us asked, how does a homeowner about to commence re-landscaping know that there's a requirement to do so? And that's okay, because unless there were already a requirement, there is not now a new requirement. And that's fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, so they would probably, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that when they're coming in for a building permit or coming in for any other requirement, this would be kind of tacked onto it as an additional requirement.
Okay. Thank you both.
Okay. Let me go ahead and open this up for public comment. If there is anyone in the public who would like to comment at this time, please give us your name and address for the record. And you have 3 minutes. Use the raise hand feature. I see no one on our panel or in attendance. So I will close public comment at this time and we will move back to discussion. If there's any further discussion before we get a motion to recommend this resolution for this resolution to recommend to the town council. Okay, we have Commissioner Luter.
Right, so I suppose Director Hamid, Ms. Murphy, directing this question to you. This says it's the state's model ordinance, but am I to understand this is actually codified as state law?
It is codified as state law.
So-
We could make it more restrictive, but not less restrictive.
So that's my point. It sounds like the discussion has been toward ways we can make it less restrictive. I think if it's state law, we quite simply can't. Towns, counties are simply instruments of the state and are subject to state laws and are not really able to go beyond that. So, unless we want to make it more restrictive, I would suggest we do as the other municipalities have done and adopt by reference. And I would also say, even though we don't have this in our municipal code, to the extent it is state law, doesn't this actually apply to any individual in Moraga who has a project such as this that would fall under it? I mean, it
Already-
applies now, doesn't it?
Yes, correct. So as I stated in my opening comments, on an annual basis, we are providing reports to the water agency on an annual basis. And now what we're doing is just formalizing by adopting the MWILO ordinance by reference.
So what is more, I don't understand what would be more onerous to either the town or the citizens to the extent we're already subject to this.
I think
It seems like it should be very simple. I don't see how we have any choice.
right. There is no choice. It's already pretty thorough. It's very technical. That's why all the agencies in Contra Costa County are adopting by reference. And we are recommending the same. We're required to. And we are now just formalizing the action.
Okay, thank you.
All right, if we have no further comments, do we want to get a motion? Or do we have further comments? Please speak up now. Forever hold your peace. This is the time. Okay. Let's move to a motion to recommend. No takers. Okay.
Amended adoption is presented.
Okay. Can you read that for us? Do you have access to it?
Yes, ma'am.
Davis?
I recommend that we vote to adopt the resolution before us. We don't yet know the number, recommending the town council adopt ordinance of Title 8 Planning and Zoning, establishing Chapter 8.178 Model Water Efficiency Landscaping in order to require water efficient landscaping design and irrigation practices consistent with the requirements of the state of California.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Bodie, and I'm going to take a roll call here. Vice Chair Hillis,
Aye.
Commissioner Helber,
I apologize. Can I ask one final question? I forgot that I saw in the resolution.
okay.
It has nothing to do with the Milo, but in the resolution, it talks about stormwater control plans. And every project has to have a stormwater control plan. I want to make sure that's a requirement also. That's page 4 of the resolution.
If it triggers MWILO, then yes.
And
So
it
MWILO requires a stormwater control plan for 500 square feet? If it's required, I'm fine with it. As Commissioner Luter very aptly pointed out, this is state law. We have to comply with it. I just don't want to do anything more restrictive than state law.
And this is required by state law that the town does need to comply with its NPDES permit and all C3 requirements. And projects that have gone through the town typically include conditions that they submit plans consistent with a C3 for stormwater control plans. So
I agree. I just don't think the thresholds are the same.
Correct.
If they are, so be it, but
Likely the mitigating factor is that the 500 square foot of landscaping is attached to a new building, and the new building required the SWIP.
can we approve it with staff clarifying that later as contingent?
could you repeat the clarification?
That the resolution as drafted will apply unless staff later determines that the stormwater control section 18.178.030 does not have the same thresholds? I just don't want to be more restrictive than state law.
Yes, we can confirm that. And I just did want to note as well that this section 030 stands on its own, although it is encapsulated within the model water efficient landscape ordinance as a separate requirement. And so I think the intent of it is to ensure that plans comply with the requirements in the NPDES permit, but we can certainly go back and ensure and make any changes necessary to make sure that it isn't triggered when it doesn't need to be.
Thank you very much.
And I am
apologize.
looking, through the chair, I am looking at page 38.8, stormwater management and rainwater retention. And it just says that project applicants shall refer to the local agency or regional water quality control board for information on any applicable stormwater technical requirements. So I think it's a broad statement in order to comply.
Maybe it's an old, but my recollection is it used to be 1 acre and I think now it's a 1/4 acre.
You're saying you don't want it to be triggered unless it's an acre. You don't want a 1/4 acre to trigger the stormwater plan. Is that what you're saying?
My only point, I think we were just talking about what the current threshold is for a stormwater management plan. My only point is I don't want a stormwater management plan to be required by our municipality unless it's required by the state.
Right.
We could also incorporate language, for example, proposed landscape and irrigation plans shall comply with all state requirements of the stormwater control plan. And include language in there to ensure that the intent of this is really to comply with state requirements.
Fine with that.
Okay, so that it retains the California requirement versus the
Exactly.
stringent
Exactly.
Colorado requirement. Yes. Okay. Is everybody on board with that? Since we have a motion,
As a friendly amendment, and I'm happy to accept it.
okay, and Commissioner Bodie, who seconded, you're on board with that clarification? Okay, let's go ahead and
I'm
take a
sorry. I'm sorry, one quick question. In the proposed 8.178.030 on stormwater management, it refers to comply with all requirements of the stormwater control plan C.3. What is the C.3 in reference to?
C3 are certain requirements required by NPDES for certain types of landscaping plans. It's sort of a term of art. Yes, thank you, Brett.
E3 is low impact development. So it's bioretention structures, things of that nature. That's why if you read section 492.16, they're talking about these guys under this code would like you to do more bioretention structures because it improves infiltration. So you get more water back to the groundwater so they get some recharge to it because part of it's about water capture under this code. but it also coordinates with the stormwater code under C3 for low impact development, which is trying to treat by biotreatment stormwater runoff.
Okay, so C3 is not a reference to MWELO, it's a reference to NPDES.
It's a reference to the regional board for San Francisco's MPDS. It's different for the state of California.
I see. All right. Well, if Ms. Murphy is happy with that, it just seems that there's really no context to it, just reading the code, but I suppose that has to be filled in. Or hopefully it makes sense to folks. Yeah, that was my only question. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And shall we move forward with a vote? Do we have any other concerns? Don't want to move past. Okay, I'm seeing none. So I'm going to go ahead and move forward with this vote that we had a motion from Commissioner Davis, a second from Commissioner Bodie, and I'm going to start again. Vice Chair Hillis.
Aye.
Commissioner Helber. Commissioner Luter.
Aye.
Commissioner Teal.
Aye.
Getting aye. Okay. Commissioner Davis.
Aye.
Commissioner Bodie.
Aye.
And Chair, aye. The resolution passes unanimously. There's a 10-day appeal period on any decisions made by the Planning Commission, and appeals can be directed to planning staff or the town clerk. I believe that the public the public meeting agenda is over here. Public hearings are over. Let's move on to routine and other matters, of which we have none, and reports. Planning commissioners, we're still not out and about, but do we have any reports that we would like to give? I see none. And staff reports.
We have the Planning Commission applications are open, and there are 3 openings for reappointments. And I believe 2 of the commissioners will be reapplying, and Commissioner Luter has told us he will not be reapplying. And so I encourage you all to look for and encourage people in the community to apply for Planning Commission. And the interviews are in February. And then I believe it starts March 1st.
Hey, did you want to mention one more time the training coming up?
Yes.
That?
So I did email everyone. There is the California League of Cities training that you attended last year via Zoom. They will have it in person this year. And this year it will be in San Ramon. So I encourage you to take advantage of that. It's 3 days. So Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And it's really an opportunity for planning commissioners to hear about all the different issues that are occurring statewide. I'm sure that the focus this year will be on the housing element, but they also provide like basic training, you know, what is the role and responsibility of a planning commissioner? Then they do mock planning commission, you know, hearings, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to hear what other cities are grappling with and to connect and also just learn about all the different issues that are happening statewide and to get that training. So please let me know if you are interested. I did send you the link, so you can open that link or just go to California League of Cities and go to the Planning Commission Training Academy, and you'll be able to see what topics they'll be covering this year. And it's in San Ramon. Usually what they do is 1 year they'll do it in Northern California, And then the following year, they will do it in Southern California. So this year, since it's so close to home, it would be a good idea to take advantage of this.
Well, one of the other things I noticed, in fact, I just got the email today. So there's the 3-day option where you pay for the entire thing, but there's also a 1-day option for those of us that may be more restricted in being able to attend these things. But I think once the agenda, and I don't think the detailed agenda yet has been released, but there is a 1-day option where you pay to attend for a day. And, you know, it might be worth looking into that once the agenda is released, but.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad, Commissioner Luter, that we're going to have you until March at least. So I would encourage you to reapply if you wanted to reconsider, but I'm glad to hear that there's some of you that are reapplying. So, okay. I think that we can move to adjournment if I can get a motion. I move to adjourn. Do I have a second?
I'll second that.
Commissioner Davis, you guys just like being with each other. It's great. It's fine. We can keep going. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. I see a unanimous vote to adjourn. So thank you. We are adjourning at, let me give you a time, 8:49 p.m. I have. And thank you so much.
We'll see you soon. Happy New Year, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
New Year.